So first, let me show you. This was back in 1883 that they created standard time across the United States. Before that, people in a town would just set their clocks so that noon was straight up. So you could go just a few minutes away and the time would be different because people would have their clocks set straight up. And so one train station might have a completely different time than another train station. And it was incredibly confusing for people. And so they decided to create a standard railway time. And this was the railroad companies, right? This was not the US government or anything.
Oh, interesting. So the railway companies are the ones that came up with this procedure or program.
Yeah. Yeah, they printed this map here. And you can see in the lower corner here, in the lower right-hand corner, where the Eastern time says railways operated by Eastern time, Central, Mountain, and Pacific time. Each have a different pattern to the line. So even though these clocks here representing the different time zones, those are based on the longitude. So Eastern time is showing at 75 degrees latitude. Longitude, 75 longitude, 90 longitude, 105 longitude, and 130 longitude. So those are all 15 degrees apart from each other. But that's not where the time zones are. That's just generally the middle of the time zone.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's not establishing time zones, but it is showing you that as you travel during your train ride, the time is going to change.
Right, exactly. And so you can see the symbols over here in this Eastern time zone area are Eastern time zone, but those are individual railroad stations. This was when they had a lot more railroad stations than they do now. And then in the middle here, you see a lot of Central time zone railways. The bulk of the railways are in the Central time zone. But you still see the Mountain time zones and the Pacific time zones over here. So that's how that worked. So from 1883 on, people would have, they would pretty much, a lot of people would set all their clocks according to the railroad clocks.
Interesting. And that's not that long ago, 1883.
No, right. About 150 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no, it's only 140 years ago.
Look, I was like, yep, whatever
I
you
don't
say.
know.
I'm not doing that math, David. You can do it. Okay.
Me either. It's 160 years ago,
Okay.
161 years ago. Okay. Anyway, so then, here's a reminder of which direction you go. You spring forward an hour and fall back an hour. You spring forward an hour in the springtime. You fall back
Lose an hour. Everybody always goes, no, I'm going to lose an hour of sleep tonight. We have to change the clock.
Yeah. So yeah, in the spring you have a 23-hour day, and in the fall you have a 25-hour day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So let's see here. So then between 1883 and 1966, actually between early 1900s, I can't remember exactly when it was, but different people in different states started doing daylight savings time. And it was causing problems with different people doing daylight savings time, and some were and some weren't. And so the railroad industry was now having a problem with keeping track of all that. And so because the railroads were an interstate transportation thing, the federal government had charge of the railroads, the standards and everything used across the country. And so they the federal government came up with a standard time in 1966, which is in my lifetime.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so then, so let's take a look at daylight savings time. Let's look at the laws. So this is going to be interesting because it's going to lead later on into a discussion that we're going to have at some point. We're going to do an income tax freedom interview, right?
That's right. I forgot to mention in the beginning that this is really about our freedom. We did talk about the Course in Miracles and freeing our minds from our programming and indoctrinations through just understanding the truth. And this is so great because this is very detailed, and I love the historical reflection on when these things happened. And I don't know, we've never really learned this history, well, unless you were more in an agricultural setting or maybe training. I think perhaps there are certain subjects where you would look at this and how it developed over time. But ultimately, the reason why you and I are talking and offering these discussions is because we want to be free, and we want to free our minds. We want to live in a way that is more aligned with nature and less aligned with indoctrination and programming to the best of our ability. So this is great. This is empowering information for us. So thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And so we go to, this is the United States Code this is the official US code on the US House of Representatives website.
Okay.
And down here, there's 54 different titles, they call them, volumes, basically.
Oh, I remember Title 10. Everything was Title 10 for me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Armed Forces, Title 10. Yeah. And so down here in Title 15 is Commerce and Trade. So this is where the interstate commerce, excuse me, is regulated by the federal government. And this chapter 6, weights and measures and standard time, and subchapter 9, standard time. This is where we find the laws about standard time and daylight saving time. Now, here in the law, they don't call it daylight saving time. They call it, let's see here. Here's section 261, Title 15, section 261. This is where the different zones are set. It's divided into 9 different zones. That's coming from Puerto Rico all the way around to Hawaii.
9 time zones.
9 time zones, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's more than I thought that there was, but that my limited view is just from New York to LA. So
then so this is 260A. And here's where it says, during the period commencing at 2 o'clock. I'll let you read this so I'm not sounding funny.
Okay, sure. The whole paragraph or just what's highlighted? Okay. During the period commencing at 2 o'clock ante-meridian AM on the second Sunday of March of each year and ending at 2 o'clock ante-meridian on the first Sunday of November of each year, the standard time of each zone established by sections 261 to 264 of this title, as modified by section 265 of this title, shall be advanced 1 hour, and such time as so advanced shall, for the purposes of such sections 261 to 264, as so modified, be the standard time of such zone during such period. However, 1. Any state that lies entirely within one time zone may by law exempt itself from the provisions of this subsection, providing for the advancement of time, but only if that law provides that the entire state, including all political subdivisions thereof, shall observe the standard time otherwise applicable during that period. And 2, any
That's
state.
okay.
Sorry, okay.
You can stop there because 2 is just about if a state is in 2 time zones, what happens then.
Okay. Yeah.
But
yeah, like Georgia, do they have, or Alabama? I feel like there's a shift, or Kentucky, something in there. I remember driving through there and it's like the time changed twice somehow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like it changed time and then it went back, but because there was like a weird, I don't know.
Yeah, the time zones in some states go through the middle of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it's talking about there. But basically, a state can just exempt itself from the daylight savings time.
Like Arizona. That's the only one that I know of. Are there more?
Arizona and Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh. And there used to be parts of Indiana as well. I don't know if they still exempted themselves, but some counties in Indiana used to be exempted from the time change.
Interesting.
Anyway, so going back to this clock here. This would be a way that one way that you could kind of rebel against the time change if you didn't want to participate in going to work earlier so that you could have more days of more hours of sunlight after work, which is the basic idea, which some people like and some people don't. Some companies like, some don't. They said that theaters didn't like it because people had more daylight hours and they didn't want to go to the movie theaters and sit in the dark
Huh,
much.
makes sense.
And then there were other companies that, like golfing and other things, that really liked it because they got more business. So you could just set different hours for your business
Hmm.
and just continue going by the.
So in other words, like when you say set different hours, where in standard time your hours are 9 to 5, but on daylight savings you could be 8 to 4 or whatever the, you know.
Yeah, you could be, let's see. Um, yeah, let's say you start at 8 o'clock in the morning. So if let's say your banker's hours, let's go banker's hours are 9 to 5, which is 17. So if the bank wanted to stay open in the same hours of the daylight, then they would switch their hours to 10 to 18 during daylight savings time.
Okay, right.
Which I would encourage anyone to do. You
Yeah.
know, you just have to go to you just have to go by um, from the second Sunday of March of each year to the first Sunday of November is when your summer hours would be.
Yeah. And then if you cite the law, then it's like you did your research and
Right. So I wanted to show you also, this will also come into play later on during the income tax discussion, and who knows where else it could come up. But this is the law that says who the law applies to. So Section 262, this is Title 15, duty to observe standard time zones. Within the respective zones created under the authority of Sections 261 to 264 of this title, the standard time of the zone shall, insofar as practicable, as determined by the Secretary of Transportation, govern the movement of all common carriers engaged in interstate or foreign commerce.
hmm,
So it's not everybody.
yeah.
And then in all statutes, orders, rules, and regulations relating to the time of performance of any act by any officer or department of the United States, whether in the legislative, executive, or judicial branches of the government, or relating to the time within which any rights shall accrue or determine, or within which any act, that's an act of government, shall or shall not be performed by any person subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, it shall be understood and intended that the time shall, insofar as practicable, as determined by the Secretary of Transportation, to be the United States Standard Time of the zone within which the act is to be performed. Now, I just wanted to show that this law, the standard time zones only applies to common carriers of interstate commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And or foreign, if it's like trains or such going between the US and Canada, for example. And all United States government of all different types, and any people that are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States government. That would be the US island territories and the District of Columbia. That's who this law applies to.
So
And
it's not everyone.
it's not everyone. As evidence of that, I
But
turned.
when it says, can we go back for a second, where it
Yeah.
says to the jurisdiction of the United States, it doesn't actually say government. So it could be interpreted as jurisdiction of the land itself, like every, so how do you explain that?
Well, jurisdiction is a matter of legality. So the United States government only has jurisdiction over the District of Columbia and any federal territories and U.S. possessions, federal areas, buildings, forts. That's per the U.S. Constitution.
Okay. Thank you for
Says,
explaining that. I'm just saying, like, reading
Yeah.
it, someone may think like, well, it says United States and I live in the United States, so why wouldn't I, So
Right.
thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's a really important thing to know, that, it's just the Washington, D.C. and these territories.
Right, exactly. There's a U.S. Supreme Court decision called Hooven and Allison Company versus EVOT. And it says that there are three senses of the term United States when used in the law. It can mean basically the federal government. It can be the United States that only includes the U.S. federal territories, or it can be the 50 states that are bound together by the Constitution. So the 50 states. The 50 states, it's also called the several states. It's called the several states of the Union. It's called the continental United States and Alaska and Hawaii, which anyway. So in this case, because it's talking about jurisdiction of the United States, it's talking about the United States government.
Okay.
It's not talking about the geographical area. Even if it was talking about the geographical United States, we wouldn't know from this whether it was the U.S. federal territories and the District of Columbia, or whether it was the 50 states. But they've conveniently told us, as they do almost always in the laws, they tell you what the definition of state is here.
I love it.
As used in this act, the term state includes the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Guam, Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, or any possession of the United States. Notice what it doesn't include here.
All the other states?
Yeah, it doesn't include the 50 states.
That's insane. Wow.
So they knew that they didn't really have the jurisdiction over the states to make them decide how they would treat time, how they would set their time within their state.
Mm-hmm.
But they worded it in such a way to make everyone think that they had complete jurisdiction over the whole country and could set the time across the whole country.
Right.
And just everybody, they fooled everybody. And so everybody just was like, oh, okay, well, we'll play along.
Yeah, we have no choice. It's like, not that there was email back then, but however the courier brought the letter, it's like, okay, all work stopped on that day because they had to freaking figure out how to make adjustments. And I don't know. I can imagine when an email comes down from higher headquarters, like, hey, there's a new thing we have to do. We have to stop everything. It's top priority. And then we have to respond by 5 p.m. tomorrow to make sure that we're all updated and complying.
Right, exactly. So what they relied on was the common interpretation of the word state here in the United States to mean all 50 states.
Yep.
Yeah. And so even back there in which notice, well, okay, so when used in this act, yeah, notice that when we go back here to 260A and it says any state may by law exempt itself from the provisions of this subsection, that's only those states here
Oh, right. Okay. So
applies.
even though they're identified, they do have the option of saying we want to be exempt.